Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people. The hope is, for you and I, is that as we listen, we'll be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments often of serendipity. In a sermon entitled The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis said, "There are no ordinary people. You and I have never talked to a mere mortal." It's my joy over the next few moments to introduce you to someone who, in their own eyes, may seem rather ordinary. But when you take a step back, you find out they are a really cool person. Today, we're going to meet Carol Wilhite. I met Carol a few years ago, found out she was interested in photography, saw some work over this past several months where she was showing forth some tremendous artistic ability. What I didn't know was Carol's full story, and boy, does she have a fantastic story. So if you're on your way to work, if you're out for a run, wherever you're at, lean in and listen to Carol Wilhite's story. Today, we're glad to welcome on Really Cool People, Carol Wilhite. Carol, let's start with your story.
Well, my story actually starts with my mother. She was such an inspirational figure to me. She was born in 1919, 10 years before the Great Depression. She was born to two people that were very poor. They were very rural. They lived in southeast Missouri. And she grew up the oldest of 8 children. So she was a worker. She was expected to help earn a living. She worked in the sawmill, helping saw lumber with my grandfather. She helped grind the corn. She helped make railroad ties. And they grew their own food. They butchered their own cows and horses and dogs or whatever. I shouldn't say all that, but I don't know. They lived off the land. I'll say it that way. And but she was, times were so hard, and she talked about that a lot. And she actually even helped bury a small child, her younger sibling. He only lived about 2 or 3 months. She cared for him. She bathed his body and prepared it for burial, even making the outfit that it would be buried in. So that was pretty stressful. She was about in the 10th grade and trying to work and help her father and trying to take care of kids and, being a caretaker and a nursemaid. She really just almost had a nervous breakdown. She just couldn't go to school anymore. So she quit. And about that time, even though she made good grades, but about that time she met my father. He had come to Missouri from Kentucky to visit relatives, and he started working with my grandfather. Well, it didn't take long before the two of them fell madly in love with each other. And he was very charismatic. He was good looking. He was funny. He was musical. He could play any instrument. He would often play for square dances and would only play if my mom would dance. If she stopped dancing, he stopped playing. So, but he was so homesick for Kentucky that he took her and they went back and to where he was from. And things were pretty good for a while. She was very poor. They were still very poor. It was the middle of the Depression again, and things were pretty good. They had 2 boys and a girl. And then things started going downhill real fast. He became, he still loved to go out, play music, but he was the kind of person that everybody wanted to be around. And everybody was great to offer him a drink. And pretty soon, his paycheck went to buy alcohol rather than feed the family. My mom wrote that so that I was the fourth child out of 6 children that they had together. And she wrote in the book that I helped her create that it was the saddest pregnancy of all, that home life had become unbearable. He was never there. When he was there, he was drinking. There wasn't enough food. The kids were hungry. She was hungry. And so that even carried over into the time that I was born. I was the first of her children to be born in a clinic. Most of them had been born by a midwife at home.
Mm-hmm.
But the clinic was being built. It hadn't actually opened yet. The delivery table was covered with sawdust. But yet the doctor said, meet me there and I'll deliver the baby. So he grabbed newspapers and put it on top of the sawdust. And, where was my father? He wasn't to be found. He was out somewhere drinking. So, words went out, get Clarence, bring him in, he's having a child. And so when he did come in, of course, he was drunk. He was kissing her and hugging her and broke the glasses on her face. He was supposed to clean up afterwards and take the dirty rolled up newspapers and stuff back to the farm to be burned because there wasn't an incinerator set up yet. And of course, he was so drunk that he forgot and had to go back the next day and find them. So I didn't come into this world in a really nice, normal, neat way. But again, home life was horrible, according to my mother. But the babies still came. I was just a year old when my brother was born. I was 2 years old when my sister was born. And when I turned 3, which I don't add up the math right there, but I was 3, it had gotten really bad, really bad. And, my mother told him that she was going to go to the law. She was just going to go to the law and say, look, you've got to do something. I don't know what to do here. And when she told him that, he got all cleaned up thinking that the law was going to come and arrest him. So he paced the grounds and he walked around the buildings and he was a nervous wreck waiting for the sheriff to come. Well, the sheriff didn't come that day. So she went to bed downstairs with the little baby, and the other kids were upstairs asleep. And he tried to wake her up and said, Mammy, that's what he called her, come outside, let's talk. I want to talk to you. And she says, I don't want to talk to you. You never listen. It's just worthless. So he started outside, and she could hear him stop for a second before he went out on the porch. And then she heard the gunshot. And so she hopped up out of bed and went very carefully to the door to look out to see what had happened. And he was laying there on his back off the porch. And she could hear blood dripping from the rafters. So she ran back inside and she woke up one of the oldest kids, and she says, I think your dad shot himself. So they, and I could go into all the gory details, but basically they ran next door to the landlady's house, and they called the sheriff, and the coroner came, to their house, and then went back. And they had her and my brother wait in the car because they weren't really sure he was dead. But, indeed he was. And so the next day, people came, food everywhere. There was no air conditioning, flies everywhere. people standing around talking in quiet clusters. Pretty sure that maybe she did it. And they wouldn't have blamed her had she done it. But she didn't, obviously. And she tried staying there. I still remember the funeral. I was only 3, but I do remember it. I wanted to see in the casket. I wanted to see my dad, but they said, no, you can't do that, you know. But at that time, she tried staying there, but she couldn't. This was too traumatic for her. So she took all except the oldest boy, because he was still working. He was helping somebody plant tobacco and harvest it. So he stayed there with my grandfather. And then we moved back to Missouri when I was 3.
Where was this at in Kentucky?
It was in western Kentucky. I was born in a little town called Lewisburg, and I can't tell you exactly where that is. I would say it's southwest part of Kentucky. So, so kind of my life kind of really started at 3, in a way. I remember going to school in the little schoolhouse that's set up above the hill. I could walk up there. I could run down there. One time I tried to sneak off from school because I thought I'd just go down there and have lunch, but that really wasn't permissible. So, but I could stand at the school and look down and see my mom's house and my grandma's house. And she moved into a little 2-room house, you know, with all but, she had 6 kids. So with 5 kids, she moved into a 2-bedroom house. I have pictures of her adding on to that house. She helped pour the cement. She helped smooth it out. She helped put the rafters up. She, and again, money was so scarce that it didn't have indoor plumbing. It didn't have running water. It didn't have bathrooms. It was basically just a house with a chimney, you know. But I was happy there. I mean, we were happy because I had a good school. My brothers and sisters were there. My aunt and uncles lived close by. We had cousins, and we could run up and down all the hills and hollers of that little town. It was probably a population of about 100.
What town was it?
Grandin, Missouri. It was actually had it's kind of like a ghost town. It was a boom town at one time. It was full of virgin pine, and the railroads were needing ties to expand the railroad across the United States. And so they came in, and I could tell you all the history, except I'm not a history buff, and I try not to remember it unless I just am forced to. But you know, it was a big boom town. They had a huge mill pond where they cut the trees and put them in there, and I guess to get the bark off the trees and then transport them up to be cut into ties. But by the time we moved there, it was pretty much a ghost town, just a few people, you know. There was still a bank there. There was a post office.
And a 1-room schoolhouse? Or was it more than 1 room?
Well, I can't recall when I first got there, but I think it had 8 grades in it. And I think it had an upstairs that was the junior high, and downstairs was all the elementary. Of course, there was no kindergarten. I mean, I just went straight into 1st grade.
Sure.
And Miss Whoops was the teacher, and Miss Whoops was an old maid, and she was very strict. And if you got out of line, she made you wear a pacifier around your neck. And if that didn't work, she got out the rubber hose, and you got a spanking with a rubber hose. And my big problem was talking. I came from a big house full of kids. We all talked. We didn't have to wait for the other one to finish. We just talked. And so I remember she would tell me to stop talking. And then she would tell me to stop talking. And then she would tell me to stop talking. And so she made me go up to the front of the class. And I had to write on the board, I must not talk, I must not talk, I must not talk, so many times. And then she said I could go sit back down. And I turned around to Billy and I said, but I wasn't talking. And so, needless to say, I had to go home and write, I must not talk 100 times. And that was like a lot of sheets of paper. And I still have some of those, I must not talk, I must not talk. So I had a pretty fun childhood, poor, could never afford fun things. We didn't have a TV, we didn't have radio, we just had each other. When I was in the 5th grade, by that time she had managed to, she had gone back to school. Through vocational rehabilitation program, they had allowed her to go to the little town of Poplar Bluff and get a cosmetology license.
Your mom did?
Mm-hmm. And so she was the first woman in the state of Missouri, supposedly, to cut a man's hair. She really loved working on anybody, she just loved cutting hair. She loved making perms. She loved doing it all. So she had finally managed to build a little house over in the middle of town, of this 50 population town. And as she was cutting somebody's hair that day, my little brother was there and she was watching her first grandchild. And so the 2 little boys were playing and they were running in and out of the bedroom and this and that. She was cutting somebody's hair, giving them a permanent or whatever. And it was December and it was windy and it was cold. And the little boys decided they would build a fire to get warm. And they built a fire in an old stove that was back there that wasn't being used, that had quilts piled on top of it. And so immediately the house just burst into flames. And she barely managed to get out. She pushed the lady and the 2 boys out and said, run to the nearest neighbor. And she loved photos. She loved history. She loved her genealogy. And she was determined to not let her pictures burn. So instead of grabbing money, which she didn't have any of, but she's grabbing her pictures and barely made it out. Her hair was singed, but the house was a total loss. So my sister rode the bus home that day because she had to go over to another town to go to high school. And she's coming down and our house was very visible from where the bus rode by. And she looks and the house is gone. There's no house, there's just smoke. And she had no idea even what had happened or where she was. I went home. Well, my 5th grade teacher came into he went out, he came back in, he says, Carol, I need you to come with me. So he walked me down the hall, and if you kept on that hall, you would turn and you would go into the boys' restroom. And I'm going, this is very strange. Why are we going down this hall toward the boys' restroom? And there was a window there that faced where my house was. And so he just didn't preface it any. He just showed me, there's your house. And all I could see were flames. And he didn't tell me if my mother was in there or my brother was in there. So I had to wait till the end of the day. And I went to my grandma's house because I knew where that was and it was close. And she let me go home with one of my friends. And I remember stopping on the way there. She told me to stop at McKinney's store. And because I didn't have any clothes, I didn't have anything. We didn't have anything. And so Mr. McKinney gave me a new pair of jeans and a shirt. And then I remember people brought us everything, tons of stuff. There were clothes, there were books, there were pots and pans, there was anything you could imagine. But none of it made any sense. I didn't know what fit, what didn't fit, what went where. So it was really a nightmarish kind of time. And I certainly can relate to people who lose their home. I mean, you lose everything. In those days, there wasn't Red Cross, and I mean, at least I don't think there was, and I don't think we got it, but neighbors, piled in to help.
There wasn't Red Cross. There were some unique insurance possibilities that people had.
I don't know exactly. Probably she had some sort of insurance, because we were able to then move into and buy and move into a better home. It was out of town. It was kind of between where I would go to high school and where the grade school was. So it was kind of on a highway. You couldn't run next door to grandma's or next door to your aunt and uncle's. And it was pretty dependent on having a car to get from one place to the other. But again, it was a happy place because there were fruit trees, and there was an indoor sink with running water. There wasn't a bathroom. Still had the outdoor plumbing, which meant you took some newspaper and went out to a building where it was very cold.
Carol, when your mom added onto the house in town that burned, did she ever put indoor plumbing in there?
Yes, but sort of. In the kitchen that she built onto, she dug a well, and they dug a well and they put a pump like this,
a hand pump.
Pump. And so it sat in the middle of the kitchen, and that's how we got our water. We didn't have to walk anywhere and get it out of a pump or a fountain or anything. So but we didn't have hot water. We didn't have a hot water tank.
So she was doing permanence. She was doing other cosmetology stuff in this house.
On the side, probably.
With just a hand pump for water.
Yeah.
And no indoor bathroom.
No.
What year was this?
Well, I was in the 5th grade, and I was, I don't know, maybe 1958, 59, something like that.
That seems very close.
Yeah. But I don't know. People who live in the country, they learn to do things any way they can to make a living. And she was resourceful, and she didn't break laws. She was very law-abiding. She actually even started a beauty shop. And it was probably shortly before that, or shortly after that. Oh, I know, it was shortly after that. She started a beauty shop because we moved from there. I backed up a little bit. I got things out of order a little bit there. Because we moved into this big old hotel that was left over from the boom town. And she opened a little shop over there. And I think, I can't recall, because surely it had indoor plumbing. Because she opened this little place, and it was called Family Beauty Shop. And I still see the sign that she was painted on the little outside of it. I remember being in there, sitting in a chair, watching her cut people's hair and stuff. And I remember one of the customers helping me with my homework, how to subtract and how to add and how it all made sense. And boy, I can subtract so good. I mean, I really can subtract well. Now, adding and multiplying, But that man really taught me how to subtract. He also taught me how to read. He says, always be looking at the word ahead of you. always be looking next. You look at this word, but you're also looking over here. So I become a pretty good reader because of that man.
Huh.
Just a customer that was in there waiting. But about that time, she was getting ready to open the beauty shop that morning. It was early. And she was carrying in firewood, I guess, for heating or something somewhere. And all of a sudden, somebody pulled up in a car, and lady got out, and Mom says, well, we're not open yet. We don't open till 9 o'clock. And she goes, I'm here to talk to you. And she started getting really smart with my mother. And my mother goes, I'm sorry. I just, Mom kept trying to talk to her, trying to calm her down. Pretty soon, she started talking bad about my mother. And that was the last straw. So my mother grabbed her by the shirt, gave her a big punch, threw her over in the ground, jumped up on top of her, was shaking her like this. And, finally, somebody either pulled her off of her or she stopped when the woman looked pretty like she wasn't breathing anymore. So the woman had to go to the hospital. She spent 3 days in the hospital. And so my mom was so outraged, she went across the street to the bank, because the bank was right there. And they weren't open yet, but you knew they were in there. And she said to, and I forgot his name, but, just said to him, she goes, how come you didn't come over there and help me? If somebody was robbing your bank, I'd come over there and help you. And he goes, Polly, that's her name. He says, Polly, you didn't look like you needed any help. And the show I had over here, I wouldn't miss it for anything. Those legs were just going up and down, and those white panties, I could just see everything. And my little sister that was with her, she was over there in the corner, and she was going, get her, Mommy, get her, Mommy. So, that's my mother.
Sounds like your mom knew how to survive.
She knew how to survive. I can't even tell you. After I, left home, went to college, had a daughter, lost that daughter, I helped Mom put her book together. She was a writer. She wrote on little scraps of paper everything, everybody. She could remember her mother carrying her to vote for the first time. My grandmother was so happy she could vote finally.
Uh-huh.
So she could remember everything. But there was all scraps of paper. She wasn't a typist. So I took all those little pieces of scraps of paper, and between the two of us, we managed to put a book together. And she wanted to call it Fading Footprints. And it was her genealogy. It was the story of her life, the story of her ancestors, the story of the Indian heritage. This was her great-grandmother.
Who was full-on Native American?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And
this is her mom and dad, my mom, and this is my mom.
Yeah.
So we put this book together, and it was like the first half of her life until my dad took his life. And then what happens after that? Life after 40 and all the things that she accomplished. And in her obituary, it says her accomplishments included becoming a licensed cosmetologist, a certified volunteer firefighter, a high school graduate, and a published author. Polly was a member of the Little Black Rural Fire District, the Van Buren Lions Club, and the Carter County Genealogical Society. So she was independent, and she was a self-made woman.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't need a man to prop her up, to wait on her, to take care of her. And so I grew up seeing that. I grew up knowing that if I was going to make it, I had to make it on my own. And she was always really interested in learning more. She read, she studied. When I was in high school, she got her GED class because they were offering it there. So the two of us studied together. But I remember when I was in second grade, I said to my mom, I said, my friend Beulah was talking about going to college. But I don't guess I can go, can I? And she goes, of course you can. You will go to college. We will find a way for you to go to college. So I always had that in the back of my head. But I was the first of anybody on my mother's side that had gone to college, and probably on my father's side. Luckily, I was able to go to the College of the Ozarks. And, their motto is you earn more you learn. And I loved being there. It was small. I was homesick. Everything was new. I'd never been outside of Carter County. I had lived such a sheltered life. I wasn't on the basketball team, wasn't in the volleyball, cheerleader, none of those things. I stayed home and helped make a living. We worked on quilts. We sewed. We cooked. We did whatever we could to make money and to make ends meet. She got commodities, which was basically like food stamps today. I didn't get a class ring. Needless to say, that was, there was no money for class rings. There was no money for really fancy clothes. I had a lot of hand-me-downs, People in the city would come down and bring boxes of clothes, and we'd go through them and see what fit.
Yeah.
So when I went off to college, it was kind of a whole new world. But again, it was a very sheltered world because it was College of the Ozarks. You couldn't have a car there.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't allowed to leave campus except on the weekends, and you had to have a special permit to do that. So it was pretty neat.
What did you study at College of the Ozarks?
Well, it was kind of funny because when I went, and everybody comes into this big room, and it was so different then than it was now. Now you do everything online. You've got counselors. You know right off what you're going to study, which classes you're going to take, all that. Well, at that time, you just went into a big room, and they go, all the art majors, come over here. All the business majors, come over here. And I'm like, what? I didn't know what? I mean, I didn't know what to major in. And nobody had ever even asked me that. Nobody ever thought to ask me that. I never had that question before. But I like to draw. So, and art was first. So I went with art people. And that's how I chose my major. It was like, but it worked. And I wasn't very talented, really. But I did okay. I mean, I made A's and B's, and I took some business class. I took one business class just because I kind of wanted to know more about that part of it. I took advertising. It was in the business department. And I passed. I don't know how in the world I did, because business is not my strong suit. I hate Excel. I hate all of the numbers. I don't like any of that stuff. But my first job, you had to work. So they assigned me to the kitchen because I had done some volunteer work in the kitchen at my grade school and high school, So I had to get up at 5 o'clock every morning for my shift. And I had to be there. I had to mix up pancakes. I had to make pancakes on this humongous grill. I had to crack eggs by the hundreds. I got so that I could crack 2 at a time in each hand and not have shells in them. I got pretty good at it. But it was pretty hard getting up at that
5 o'clock in the morning. Yeah.
So after you were there a semester, you could ask for a transfer to other occupational areas on campus. So from there, I went to maintenance. Well, that's not too hard. Just push a broom around, clean this up. So I thought. But my first supervisor's name was Bert. And Bert wore white gloves, and he would come into the room and he would dust the ledges to see if you had cleaned them correctly. But in maintenance is where I met my husband. He was a janitor and I was a janitor. And I had no idea he was different than me. His skin was a different color than mine, but I didn't know. I mean, I'd never been around Black people. I didn't know that there was a difference. I mean, he was just a nice person. He'd talk to me and we'd talk, and he just loved to talk and I loved to listen. And so he enlightened me that he enlightened me about racism, and I really had no idea. I didn't know. I mean, I grew up in a town that proudly proclaimed that there had never been a Black person spend the night in Carter County. Well, I didn't know what that meant. I thought, well, that's odd. I mean, okay, so what, But, the times were 1970s, and it was still pretty taboo.
What was it like to take him to your family?
They had to get used to it. They had to get used to it. His family had to get used to it. But, I mean, it was already a done deal. I mean, we didn't tell them. We didn't make a big deal about it, We didn't probably even introduce them. We graduated together. And then I worked for a year for the college in their graphic arts department. And then we moved to Nebraska together. And my mother about freaked out. She thought maybe I was expecting a child. And I go, what? That's not why I'm moving. Maybe that was the reason people moved in those days. But, that wasn't it at all. So when we were there, we just went to get the blood tests and all the necessary papers. And fortunately, my husband got very sick and had to go to the emergency room. And they had to take some blood to see what was wrong with him. Because he's laying there, he's terrified of needles. And he says, in those days, you had to have a blood test. And he said, could you take enough blood for a blood test to get married? Otherwise, we may not have ever been married. But so he did that. So it was about to expire, and we decided, well, we don't want to go through that again. He didn't want to get another test. So we went to the Unitarian church and asked the minister if he would marry us. And he said, yes, he would. So we got up that Saturday. We went down, just in our jeans, our T-shirts, whatever. And he managed to get his wife and a little kid that was playing out on the merry-go-rounds to be the witnesses. And we got married, and we said, I do. And John went home and watched football, and I went to the grocery store. And we stayed married for 43 years until he died. And we loved each other greatly. And it was never a mistake. It was never a mistake.
When you were at College of the Ozarks, did you watch much film? Because one of the films that came out in the late 60s was To Serve With Love.
I believe I did. Now, I have a really bad memory. And I know that John was very enlightened about racism. And he knew a lot. I know that he took me to see a movie at the local theater. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Sidney Poitier. Yeah, I remember that one particular. But, we just knew we loved each other. I mean, we just loved each other. That's all it was to it. But it was gradual. And when I made that choice, I was basically choosing between my family and John. And I think he was too, because we were together. They either accept it or they don't. It's not our problem. It's their problem. And so we always carried ourselves very respectfully and very honorably. You never saw us getting down out in public. You never saw us doing things that would draw attention to ourselves or cause conflict, even though we were caught up in some of those sometimes just because of the times.
Mm-hmm.
But my family came to love John. His family came to love me. And especially when our daughter was born, she was a bridge builder. I mean, how could you not love this beautiful little child? She was 100% me. She was 100% him. She was the best thing that had either happened to either one of us. And we loved her with every ounce of our being. Every ounce of our being. She was born in Nebraska. But about the time she was 6 months old, we realized that, you know what? We're really far from home, both of us. We had nobody there. We had no parents. We had no cousins. We had nothing. And so in our mind, we thought, it's 1981. Let's move back we'll get a job in Little Rock. It'll be easy to get a job in Little Rock. Wrong. The economy kind of bucketed out at that point. He couldn't find work. I couldn't find work. We were staying with his parents. And so we eventually wound up moving to Poplar Bluff because he did get work there and I got work there. But I guess the biggest thing that I adjusted to was a whole new culture, a whole new set of norms, a whole new set of customs, beliefs. I don't know. I mean, his father was an AME minister, African Methodist Episcopal pastor. He was promoted and became a presiding elder, which meant he was over several churches. I didn't have a church background in my life. The only experience I had in church was my mom had taken us to a Southern Missionary Baptist church for a while. And the minister was so hellfire and damnation. And those are words I'm going to use because that's what he preached. And I was so terrified that if I didn't go up and say I was saved, that I would definitely either incur his wrath. And I was probably more afraid of that than I was of going to hell. But I did. I went up, and it did change my life. It was kind of odd because I really went on out of fear. But when I went home, I felt, I don't know if it was relief because he wasn't going to be after me anymore, was going to be preaching at me. Or maybe that God really just put his arms around me. But after that, I always believed in God, and I always felt him around me. I didn't feel him when I was in church. I felt very alienated when I was in church. There were people dressed up in fancy things, and I hated clothes. I could care less. Just give me some blue jeans and a shirt. I don't care. That's not me. I don't need fancy things. I don't want to want hoopla and a lot of rigmarole. But his church was quite different. They did. They had big bands, big music, big choirs, fancy hats, fancy suits, fancy dresses. But they made me very welcome. And I never felt... So basically, with Lanita, that's my daughter's name, I became entrenched in a whole new world. We moved to Springfield when she was in kindergarten. And John came and took a job at vocational rehabilitation with the Department of Education. I took a job with United Way of the Ozarks. And we poured our hearts into making this a better community. Lanita and I started, and John started, an organization through the United Way called the Center for Interracial Family Living. And our goal was to help couples who had biracial children to understand the culture and to embrace it, to be exposed to different things than maybe they saw in Springfield, Missouri, or in the little town outside Springfield, Missouri. We had people come from Lebanon. We had people come from Reed Springs. So it was quite the deal. And I enjoyed it, and it made a difference. And, but my work at United Way was kind of, for some reason, it was changing a little bit. I was becoming more of a community organizer. Grants became a thing, and funding became a thing. And I don't know, just one day I thought, maybe I should look for a job. I don't know why. And I saw a job opening in Mount Vernon at the Missouri Rehabilitation Center. And it was for a graphic artist. Well, I mean, that's what I basically was. So I applied and I got the job. But I didn't like driving. I don't like driving even still. So it was 30 miles from here. So I would take the little back road, I didn't go on I-44. So I took Lanita with me to see where I was going to be working. And we're driving along, we're going past the hills and the hollers and the farms, and everything's just, oh, Mom, yes, you should take this job. You'll get to see cows every day. And yes, I did. I loved it there. It was so beautiful. But 3 months after I took that job, Lanita and I were taking a last practice drive before she took her driver's test. She was driving, and I was in the seat beside her. She had her driver's permit, and we came to a bad intersection. We loved country roads, but that country road, it was division, and I think in 125, I can't really recall now, but the stop sign was way back. So we stopped. We looked both ways, couldn't see anything. So when we pulled forward, the big trimming truck came up over the hill, blocked by the foliage and stuff, and just hit us dead in the side of the car, killing Lanita instantly, putting me in the hospital for 10 days with a brain injury. I went back to work after 3 months. They held my job for me. And they treated people with traumatic brain injuries. That was their specialty. And they welcomed me with open arms. They were so patient with me. I would get lost. I couldn't remember stuff. I really was only functioning at about 40%. But they didn't care. And they helped rehabilitate me. And God rehabilitated me. Because every day I drove that beautiful drive, and every day I prayed, and every day I saw things that let me know that God was very close. So I stayed there another 15 years, and then I retired. And John and I both grieved Lanita really until the day he died. I had found peace, and he was just starting to find peace. I think he liked to put things in little boxes. And with me, I just opened up, When she died, my heart, my everything was poured out on the table. And everybody that knew me knew everything about me. They knew the pain, the sorrow, the tears, the remembering, the agony, the ecstasy, all of it. So I healed much more thoroughly and much much more completely than he did. When we reached the 20-year anniversary, which was in 2018, with 20 years. And he said, okay, I'm through grieving. I'm going to move forward. Next year, it's going to be different. I'm not going to let this day destroy me. And he died before that next anniversary. He died suddenly in the night of a heart attack. He woke me up saying, I'm really, really sick. I'm sick. Something I ate. I'm saying, are you going to throw up, And I'm like racing around, getting a bucket, whatever, And well, he didn't. And he tried drinking water and he couldn't. And I said, do you want me to call the ambulance? And he says, I just want to lay down. So he just laid over there like that in his bed. And I put his feet back up on the bed and I covered him up and I turned the light off and I snuggled up next to him. And I didn't hear him groaning anymore. And I thought, gosh, surely he didn't go to sleep that fast. So I said, John, are you? And he was gone. So when I jumped up and turned the light, he was gone, just like that. And the ambulance came and all of that, but he was gone. And I cried, but they were tears of joy because I knew he wouldn't ever have to cry again. He would never, ever feel that pain again. And I was so thankful that I knew where he was going. And I was thankful for me because now I knew Lenita was not alone. Lenita had somebody with her. And I knew that if I had been the one to go first, it would have destroyed John. It would have put him in the hospital. I was the stronger one, and I could handle the grief. I could handle it. And actually, I've handled it quite well because once we lost Lenita, death becomes it becomes very real. And the first thing I did was, well, where is heaven? Well, what is heaven? How do I get there? I asked everybody I knew, strangers on the street, preachers, teachers, friends, relatives, where is heaven and how do you get there? I read every kind of book I could find. I wanted to know. I didn't want to get up there and they says, no, only the Hindus get in. I didn't want to get up there and say, only the Baptists get in. I didn't want any surprise. I want to know where she is and I want to know how to get there. So John and I talked a lot about death. We talked a lot about grief. We talked a lot about our deaths and when we would go and how exciting it would be. And we both looked forward to that time. So I know he's where he wants to be. And I know he wasn't too keen about being around here any more than I am. Life is hard. I want to be there. I won't take my life and I won't go there. God's got a plan somehow. I don't know what it is. I keep waiting for it, but it just shows up in little bits and pieces, I guess. But, after he died, I was all alone. I had no family here. It was just me in that house, in that empty house, in that house that was too silent. And he was my social person. He was the one that connected us to things. I was kind of the silent piece. I really like a lot of alone time. He liked lots of people time. So we balanced each other out like that. But I knew after losing him that I would have to reach out. I would have to find me a connection, a new community, a new group to call family. And so I went to a grief share over at Cherry Street Baptist Church. In a Baptist church, mind you now. I was like, okay, I must really be desperate if I'm going to a Baptist church. But they were very nice. And one of the women there just reached out and hugged me and has become one of my dearest friends. She's 86, and I love her dearly. We talk every day. We see each other every day. But another person that had just lost her husband was there. And we embraced and we connected. And she too was alone. She had no family here. She had no kids here. And we said to each other, she was looking for a church. I wasn't particularly, but I said, well, let's just start. I says, I might recommend we try Schweitzer. I says, I took my daughter there one time for summer school, and it was pretty cool. I says, I liked it. And my father-in-law always said that if you can't find an African Methodist Episcopal church, seek out a Methodist church. So that's, what I did. And we came. Sheila welcomed us with open arms. It wasn't probably 3 weeks until I met Jen, and I told her I was a graphic artist, and wasn't probably 2 weeks until she asked me to take a picture of baptism. And I'm like freaking out because all I've ever taken pictures of are cows and barns. But I'm up here and they're going to do this baby baptism. And I didn't even know what happened during the baby baptism. And I almost missed the whole thing because I was getting ready for all the hoopla, and here it is. But I got a great picture. And so, as you know, I joined the church. I never in a million years ever would have thought that I would join a church. But here I am.
You told me recently, because we went through this season of Lent, and you were an artist that was creating a couple of art pieces every week for the season of Lent. Can you talk about what that meant to you?
Wow. Well, you see, I don't know much about the Bible. I never studied it. I tried reading it a bunch of times. It was like reading Greek. You could have just handed me a book written in Martian. I don't know. It just didn't make sense. Especially after my brain injury. And oh boy, did I want to know where God was. I'd read that. I'd read and read. People gave me different versions of it. I'd read. It didn't make any sense. None of it made sense. Until I heard Pastor Spencer. And it's making sense. And it's making sense. And while working with Jen and Sydney, the graphic designer, I said to them, I says, there's a lot of artistic people here. Maybe we should start an art group. And she goes, we've been thinking about doing that. So they started an art group. Well, I didn't know they were going to give us an assignment. So right off, they say, well, Lent's coming up. And Pastor Spencer wants to do the last week. And every week, he's going to talk about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or whichever day of the week it is. And we'd like some art. We'd like to have an art exhibit. And I'm looking around at all these other artists. And I'm thinking, she's a really good artist. He's a great artist. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'm just pitiful artist. But, so they said, well, what are your ideas? And I go, well, why don't each one of us just make a piece each week? And we can just bring it in and there'll be a new exhibit each week. So each artist can make their own thing and bring it in. Well, later on, I went home and I wanted to shoot myself right between the eyes when I thought, oh yeah, that means me too. Oh my gosh. I was about to have a nervous breakdown. And I told everybody, I says, well, I don't even know what Lent is really, but people give up something during Lent. And I thought, well, maybe I should try that too if I'm going to be in this Lent thing. So I tried to give up chocolate. That lasted 2 hours. At 9 o'clock, I said, 9 o'clock that morning, I got up. I says, I'm going to give up chocolate. No, ice cream, chocolate ice cream. I'm going to give up ice cream. Oh, yeah, I can do this. At 11 o'clock, I'm ordering a hot fudge sundae. So that didn't work. So I couldn't think of anything else to give up. But after I started this art project, I definitely gave up peace of mind. I sweated bullets for the whole 6 weeks. Each week I would try. Oh my gosh. I prayed, I cried, I tried this, I tried that. I never read so much scripture in my life. I almost memorized that whole thing. But I did it. And it was pretty amazing. It was a pretty amazing experience. I kind of felt like I got to know Jesus. I mean, he was just kind of, in my mind, I just go straight to God. Jesus was just, yeah, he was fine. He came, he did this stuff, But I know that God is where I'm really going. And yeah, I say those things like in the name of Jesus and all that stuff, but I'm going straight to God. So I just go straight to God. I don't go through any middleman. But after Lent, I really appreciate what he did. And I appreciate the person he was and is and still is. But he's still over there. And I'm kind of and Spencer is like, he's speaking my language because I've always thought of Jesus as my brother, I mean, if I'm a child of God and Jesus was a child of God, then doesn't that kind of make us like brother and sister? So I don't know how it all fits together, and I don't know where it'll all take me, but I did enjoy that, and I got lots of compliments, and not on my work, but just on the whole thing. And I got to know the other artists and appreciate them and respect them, and I'm not quite so intimidated now. I've got some confidence out of doing that.
Well, Carol, you are a great artist. You're a great artist.
Well,
You see some things and you capture some things that produces a lot of beauty in this world. And I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. And I want to just encourage you that you have been on one incredible journey, and you shared with us just a really incredible journey.
well, I think it's still taking me somewhere. Otherwise, I would have got to go when Lanita went or when John went. But I guess I've got something to do. I guess he wanted me to take those blooming pictures. It's like, okay, God, I've got this under control. Now what? I do enjoy that. And I enjoy taking pictures of people and catching their expressions and stuff.
Yeah.
And people compliment me all the time. They come up and say, thank you for taking photos. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. One of the things I would just point out and say to you is Jesus said, because one time the disciples said, show us the Father. You keep talking about the Father. He said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so I'm glad you got to spend time getting to see the face of Jesus this Lent.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And I guess this is my journey with Schweitzer, because it's really kind of putting the icing on the cake.
Carol, you're a really cool person.
Well, I've got the other side of me, and we'll have that on another discussion.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. A big thank you to Carol for sharing her story. As you listened to Carol's story, it's my hope that you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged, and that you begin to behold the really cool people that are around you each and every day. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is our executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. Until next time, stay cool.